hope you all had great weekends. Welcome to week 3, where we talk a little bit about how we think about others. One quick announcement, I will be posting the next week's materials on probably Mondays or Tuesdays so that I can incorporate feedback from the previous week's activities. Since the due date is Sunday at midnight, that'll give me time to review all of your submissions and give you some feedback. So today I'm going to give you some of that feedback and then give a brief introduction to each of modules 5, 6, and 7, and then I'll walk through the activities that we'll be doing this week. So first, the activity feedback. I thought your reflective writings were great. You mentioned a lot of similar requirements so that groups could collaborate with each other, things like communication, hard work or work ethic, and having respect for each other. Each one of you has your own strengths, and everyone has weaknesses that can influence how well we do on our own and how well we do in a group. I would like you to be mindful of your own strengths and weaknesses as you go through the project and how those influence your effectiveness of the group. And most importantly, as you all mentioned, definitely communicate with each other. As I said in week 1, communication is key. So recognize when you're working well together and don't hesitate to identify concerns early and definitely tactfully or diplomatically to minimize any group conflict that you have. If something isn't working for you, just let the group know and tell them why. And then offer some suggestions for alternate approaches. Ask them for their input as well. These are your groups, so you can create the approach that works best for each of you. And because these are your groups, you can own each of your groups. If you'd like to rename your group instead of having just a letter, let me know if you want to come up with a group name, and I can see if I can change that on Scholar. Each quiz will be a mix of multiple choice and short answer or essay. It could be all multiple choice, it could be all short answer and essay, it could be some of each. I did go through the responses for quiz 2 and ended up regrading the first item. The textbook mentioned the self-reference effect but didn't explicitly mention it. If you go to the top of page 20, and this is the Kindle version of the textbook, so it might look a little bit different. It might have slightly different page numbers on your version. Here where you can see it says, if something is central to your self-concept, then you'll tend to notice things that are consistent with that. So I gave the example of being athletic. So if you're watching TV, then you would tend to notice things that talk about athletics in the news or on TV shows. So that is the self-reference effect, that if there's something that you experience or something that you see that refers to something that is a characteristic that you have or a way that you think about yourself, not only are you much more likely to notice it, but you're also more likely to remember it. So throughout the course, I'll be incorporating a lot of that to help you remember things once the course is over. You did a great job on the other questions. This was a short quiz. I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for it. Future quizzes, I just wanted to let you know, will have opportunities to take it twice. That could account for potential technical difficulties. If you take it once and then have a problem, you are able to take it again. And if you didn't do as well as you'd like that first time, and even if you didn't have any technical issues, you can definitely still retake it to see if you can get a better grade. Only your highest grade will be recorded, so if you do end up having technical issues that second time, your first attempt will still be on record and it won't drop your grade at all. So moving on to a brief introduction to Module 5, The Power of Positive Thinking. Self-efficacy is the sense that you can do something. So you say, yes, I can do that. And there are some things that are associated with that sense of self-efficacy or that can lead to a sense of self-efficacy. Self-efficacy tends to be associated with being more persistent while working on a task, having fewer anxiety and depressive symptoms, having better academic outcomes, and also having better health. And that sense of I can do it tends to depend on your perceived sense of control over outcomes. So whether or not you think you can control something. And this is called the locus of control, specifically an internal locus of control. So you think that your life and your destiny is within your own control, inside you. On the other side, an external locus of control would be things that are not within your control. So it could be due to other people or other circumstances. A lot of self-help books build on the fact that people like feeling like they're in control of their surroundings. And one of these is the book The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. She turns things that may seem like they're in an external locus of control to seem like they're actually within your own control. So she says that by thinking positively, you'll become happier, healthier, and wealthier. She doesn't necessarily say exactly how that happens, but I suppose that's the secret. Module 5 also discusses things related to self-esteem, like narcissism and aggression. And you might think that self-esteem is always good, and that having high self-esteem will make you happy, but this isn't always the case. So be sure to check out the last paragraph on page 54 for some fine points on self-esteem and happiness. So exactly what kinds of things should you be aiming for to actually increase your happiness? Module 6 looks at the fundamental attribution error. And it does say it's the fundamental attribution error, so you know that means that it's important. According to page 61 in the Kindle version of the textbook, it's fundamental because it, as the textbook says, it colors our explanations in basic and important ways. So that means it influences how we perceive other people. That influences how we interact with these other people, and also how we think about the world in general. And we tend to commit the fundamental attribution error when we're explaining other people's behavior. So this is specific to other people's behavior. We tend to attribute other people's behavior to their disposition or their personality traits rather than taking into account factors that might be due to the situation or due to the environment. And you'll want to pay attention in the reading to how explanations for other people's behavior influences our use of the fundamental attribution error. So if people were instructed to act a certain way or not, how that influences people's attributions for their behavior if they know that they've been given those instructions. The fundamental attribution error and the actor-observer effect are pretty similar, and they can be easily confused. One way of differentiating between them is, in addition to overemphasizing dispositional or personality characteristics as explanations for other people's behavior, the actor-observer bias also includes fewer personality or dispositional explanations and more situational explanations of our own behavior. So the actor-observer effect basically includes the actor part of it. So we're attributing our behavior, our own behavior, as the actor to the situational explanation. And there was a meta-analysis completed in 2006 that looked at a wide range of articles that studied the actor-observer effect. He found that the effect is actually quite small and tends to be influenced by whether our behavior is good or bad. And you'll want to be sure to check out page 59 for more information on that. And as with a lot of concepts in social psychology, there are cultural differences. East Asian cultures are more likely to take the situation into account, or environmental influences into account when they're explaining other people's behavior. And you'll want to see page 61, at least in the Kindle version of the textbook, for more information about that. And you can use this information, the information about the fundamental attribution error, to apply it to real life, especially recent events. This last election has tended to polarize the country, and we can't move forward and accomplish things if we can't communicate and work with each other. And you'll be experiencing this on a much smaller scale in your group projects. So as an exercise, there are one of two things that you could try. First, you could try and find someone who has an opinion that's different from yours. And without trying to change each other's opinions, that's very important, just ask each other why you believe what you do. Try and get as much information as you can, as much of an explanation as you can. And when they're done describing their explanation, reword it so you can make sure that you understand what they're saying. And then switch roles. So you'll explain your opinion and why you believe what you believe, and then they can reword what you're saying to make sure that they understand why you hold your opinion. And again, this is very important. You're not trying to change each other's opinions. You're just listening and talking about why you think what you think. Another option is to ask someone in a different situation how they got where they are. So you could ask them to explain situational factors that influence their current situation. They might talk about their family's socioeconomic status, opportunities in their school or neighborhood, availability of mentors, among other factors. There could be multiple. And the third module that we'll talk about briefly is the module that looks at intuition, which asks, in part, how do we know things? Most of our life is lived pretty automatically. We don't have to think about every finger movement behind every keystroke when we're typing, and we don't have to consciously maintain our upright status while we're seated or standing, and we don't usually have to labor over every word we say to our friends. We can also absorb information pretty automatically, but we can also intentionally learn some things. So the way that we know things can sometimes be automatic and can sometimes be controlled. So it may be something more automatic where someone says, which pizza toppings do you want? And you might know in an instant, my favorite is, whatever you prefer, maybe black olives and pepperoni. But you can also intentionally and in a controlled way think about things. So if you are taking a practice test and you're trying to decide which psychological concept best fits definition, that definitely takes more of a controlled effort, especially in the early stages of learning something. Eventually you might get to that automatic stage, which would be ideal, especially once you're being assessed on things. Check out pages 67 and 68 for information on overconfidence and things that are associated with it or that lead to it. Page 68 also discusses the influence of time on confidence. People are most overconfident when a task is a long way off, which is the distal part of it. Think about distal as distance. Then when it's more proximal, when it'll happen sooner. When it's sooner, then confidence tends to drop. And overconfidence is supported by the confirmation bias, which explains that when people have a belief or hypothesis, they tend to seek out supporting information rather than trying to disprove their belief or their hypothesis. So you can imagine what this might mean for healthcare. If doctors are using a confirmation bias, they might assume that every time you make an appointment, it's because you have a cold. So they would only ask you about symptoms that are consistent with having a cold. So they might say, have you felt achy? Have you had the sniffles? Have you had a cough? Have you had a stuffy nose? All of those symptoms are consistent with having a cold, but they're also potentially consistent with multiple other diagnoses. So they might miss an important symptom if they're not asking you about things other than symptoms associated with a cold. And if you don't get the correct diagnosis, then you're not likely to get the correct treatment, which could result in not feeling well for longer than necessary, which of course you don't want. So the trick is to actually try and disprove whatever your hunch is. So if they think you have a cold, they might ask you about symptoms that are consistent with strep throat or the flu instead, to see if it actually is a cold or if it might be something else. So moving on to the activities for week 3. By now you probably have a pretty good sense of the weekly flow. This week we have a few more things than last week, but just as last week, all activities will be due this coming Sunday at midnight. So one of the things you'll want to do is to write the second online post. So pick 2 concepts that have been covered in the reading so far, name and define them, and come up with a unique example about how they can be applied to your own life. Second, you'll do a continuation of your thoughts and on yourself and yourself in groups for reflective writing 2, and then you'll take quiz 3.